Night of the Hartwell Foundation Gala, the chandeliers in the grand atrium of Chicago's Lyric Opera House threw diamond light across 400 faces, and every single one of them turned when Leonora Voss walked through the door. She didn't rush. She'd learned in the 18 months since her life had detonated quietly in the kitchen of the home she'd built, that rushing was something you did when you were afraid. And she wasn't afraid anymore. Her husband stood near the bar with the woman he'd replaced her with. Leonora had known they'd be there. She'd planned around it the way she used to plan around load-bearing walls, identify the structure, understand the pressure, work with what you have. Owen had his hand on the small of Kelsey Drummond's back, that particular gesture of possession he used when he wanted a room to notice something. The room noticed. Then it noticed Leonora. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing tray and let them look. 14 months earlier, Leonora Voss had been in the middle of a triple bypass when her phone buzzed 4 times in succession on the steel tray beside the sterile field. Her scrub nurse, Deb, had glanced at it. Leonora hadn't. She was 2 hours into a surgery that required every gram of her attention, and whatever was happening outside this operating room would wait. What was happening outside that operating room did not, in fact, wait. She found out at 7:40 p.m., still in her scrubs, standing at her locker with her shoes half off. Deb handed her the phone with the look that cardiothoracic surgeons recognize immediately. It's the expression of someone delivering information they wish they could hand to literally anyone else. Someone left these in the waiting room, Deb said, at the front desk. Ask them to make sure you got them personally. A plain white envelope. Inside, printed photographs, 8 of them. Leonora sat down on the bench and went through them one by one with the methodical focus she brought to everything. Owen at a restaurant she knew, Café Ingrid, where he supposedly had a standing Thursday client dinner. Across from him, a woman with dark hair and the particular posture of someone trying very hard to look like she belonged somewhere. Owen outside a hotel in the West Loop. Owen and the woman on the sidewalk outside their building talking and laughing in a way that people only do when they've forgotten to perform being casual. The last photograph was the one that did something permanent to the inside of Leonora's chest. It was taken through a coffee shop window. Owen was looking at the woman the way he used to look at Leonora in their first apartment. Back when they were both residents surviving on 4 hours of sleep and takeout pad dye. Back when loving each other felt like the one uncomplicated thing in an otherwise impossible life. He was looking at Kelsey Drummond. Leonora would learn the name later like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for years. Leonora sat with the photographs for a long time. Then she put them back in the envelope, finished changing out of her scrubs, and drove home. Owen was in the kitchen when she walked in. He'd made pasta, which was the only thing he could reliably cook, and he was pouring wine, and the whole scene was so ordinary that Leonora stood in the doorway for a moment wondering if she'd imagined the photographs. She hadn't. She set the envelope on the counter between them. He looked at it. He looked at her. And then something happened that she hadn't expected, which was that his shoulders dropped. Not in guilt, but in something that looked distressingly like relief. "How long?" she said. Not a question, really. An opening for a confession she wasn't sure she wanted. 11 months. She made herself keep breathing. 11 months. She'd performed over 300 surgeries in 11 months. She'd saved the life of a 42-year-old father of 3 who'd coded on her table in February. Had spent a Tuesday in March talking a family through a prognosis no family should ever receive. Had eaten meals standing over the hospital sink while Owen was apparently building something with another woman entirely. Her name? Kelsey. She's a pharmaceutical rep. We met at the cardiology conference in I don't need her biography. Owen sat down. She noticed he didn't look devastated. He looked tired in the way of someone who's been carrying something heavy and has finally put it down. Leonora, I've been trying to figure out how to have this conversation for months. We could have started it any time. With you? When? He rubbed his face. You leave at 5 in the morning. Half the time you're not home until 9. I planned an anniversary dinner last spring and you got called in at 6:30 and I sat in that restaurant alone for 2 hours before I gave up and came home. I'm a surgeon, Owen. People's hearts stop. I know. His voice was quiet, but so did ours. And you didn't notice. She absorbed that, the cruelty of it, and also the partial truth of it, sitting in her chest like something she'd have to operate around for a long time. What do you want? I want a divorce. He said it like he'd practiced it. Maybe he had. I want to be fair about it. I know your career is. I know what you've built. I'm not trying to take anything from you. Good, she said, because there's nothing of mine to take. She meant it as a boundary. She would later understand it was a declaration she'd have to spend the next year defending. She went upstairs. She did not cry. She made a list. Leonora had built her reputation over 15 years the way she built everything, quietly, precisely, without making a noise about it. She was the surgeon other surgeons called when the case was impossible. She'd published research on minimally invasive valve repair that had changed protocols at 17 hospitals. She'd trained fellows who now ran their own programs at places like Mayo and Cleveland Clinic. Owen Voss was a hospitalist, solid and competent and well-liked, and he had spent 11 years riding the social current generated by his wife's reputation. Hospital galas, department fundraisers, the annual Heart Association dinner, everywhere they went, people shook his hand warmly, called him Owen, and then turned to Leonora with that particular brightness that meant they'd been waiting to talk to her. She hadn't paid attention to what that dynamic was doing to him. She would spend time later wondering if she should have. She'd spend less time on that than she expected. The first sign that Owen's exit wasn't as clean as he'd promised came 3 weeks after he moved into his own place. Her department chief, Dr. Augusto Reeves, called her into his office with the expression of a man who would prefer to be golfing. "There's been some conversation," he said carefully, "about your schedule. My schedule is the same as it's always been." Owen mentioned to a few people. He stopped, started again. "There are concerns that your workload has impacted your home life in ways that could speak to your overall. Who specifically is concerned about my personal life, and in what professional context are they raising it?" Augusto looked pained. "The credentialing committee meets next month for standard review. I want you to be prepared." She was out of his office in 4 minutes and on the phone with her attorney in 6. Her attorney was a woman named Patricia Osei, who had the demeanor of someone who had witnessed the full range of human behavior and been surprised by precisely none of it. Patricia listened to the credentialing concern and set down her pen. "He's building a record," Patricia said. "He said he wanted to be fair. People say that before they talk to their own attorneys." Patricia looked at her. "What do you know about his representation?" Owen had hired a man named Curtis Webb, who specialized in what Leonora would come to think of as creative marital arithmetic. Curtis Webb's first formal proposal arrived 2 weeks later: 50% of all joint assets, plus a spousal support calculation based on the lifestyle they'd maintained throughout the marriage, plus a professional reputation contribution. Claimed the argument being that Owen's decade of accompanying Leonora to hospital events, maintaining their social profile and supporting her career had materially contributed to her professional success. Leonora read the document twice. Then she called Patricia. "He's claiming credit for my career because he came to Galas with me. Curtis Webb makes this argument regularly." Patricia's voice was flat. "It occasionally works. What does it take to make it not work?" "Documentation. Everything you've ever done, in writing, with your name on it. Every surgery, every publication, every protocol you've changed. We build the record of who actually created what, and his contribution." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about the social events, the galas, the dinners. How did you get invited in the first place?" Leonora thought about it. The Heart Association dinner. Dr. Reeves had nominated her for a committee. The hospital gala, she'd been honored for her research outcomes. The cardiology conference where Owen met Kelsey, Leonora had been a keynote speaker. She thought about the pharmaceutical companies that sent representatives to court her, the device companies that wanted her feedback on new technology. She thought about the network of colleagues and department heads that formed the professional ecosystem of their lives. "He attended events generated by my work," she said slowly. "He socialized in rooms you earned entry to," Patricia said. "That's different from building those rooms." Leonora sat with that for a moment. "What do I do?" "You fight," Patricia said simply. "And then you called Janelle Okafor." Janelle Okafor had an office in River North that was aggressively understated, which Leonora recognized as the aesthetic of someone who didn't need to impress anyone. She was 60. Unhurried, with the focused attention of a person who had learned to hear what wasn't being said. "Tell me what you want," Janelle said when Leonora finished. "I want the truth on record. I want people to understand what I built and how I built it. I want Owen to understand that what he's claiming, the contribution he's describing, isn't what actually happened. And the divorce settlement, I want it to be honest, not revenge. No." Leonora considered this. "I don't think I'm capable of wanting revenge. I'm capable of wanting accurate documentation." Janelle smiled slightly. "That's more useful anyway." She pulled out a notepad. "First question. The affair began when he says it did. He said 11 months. I want to verify that." She met Leonora's eyes. Affairs don't start at the first physical event. They start with intention, with the kind of attention that shifts the gravitational field of a relationship. I've never met an affair that started when the unfaithful party claimed it started. The hotel receipts, when Leonora's team eventually found them, went back 14 months. Owen had been seeing Kelsey Drummond for 3 months before he claimed the relationship had begun. 3 months when he'd still been coming home eating the pasta he cooked, asking about her day with what had felt like genuine interest. The expense records told another story. There were charges on their joint account, a credit card Owen managed, one Leonora hadn't looked at closely because she was, as anyone who knew her could confirm, a person who performed cardiovascular surgery rather than reviewed credit card statements. Restaurant dinners she'd never attended. A hotel in Milwaukee during a weekend. Owen said he'd visited his college roommate. Flowers charged to the joint account, delivered to an address Leonora didn't recognize. Not illegal. He had access to the account, but it was a narrative and the narrative mattered. Meanwhile, Janelle set Leonora to work on a different reconstruction. "You're gonna stop turning down interviews," Janelle said. "I don't do interviews. You're gonna start. Every major medical publication that's asked in the past 2 years, you accept. Every speaking invitation from a hospital board or medical school, you accept." The story right now is a surgeon whose marriage fell apart. The story we're building is the definitive expert in your field whose husband has incorrectly characterized her professional contributions. That will take time away from. You're spending that time fighting attorneys. Redirect it. Janelle looked at her steadily. "You're not comfortable with visibility. I'm comfortable with outcomes. I'm not comfortable with talking about myself. Owen has been talking about you for 11 months. He's built a persona for you, distracted, absent, career-obsessed to the exclusion of everything human. We need to replace that with something real." Janelle leaned forward. "You have residents you've trained, patients whose lives are different because of your work, colleagues who know exactly who you are. We're going to let them tell the story before Curtis Webb tells his version in court." The reconstruction took 4 months. Leonora gave an interview to the Journal of the American College of Cardiology about her minimally invasive valve work. She was uncomfortable for most of it, which she mentioned to her fellow Dr. Amara Singh afterward, who laughed at her. "You saved my father-in-law's life 3 years ago," Amara said. "You were not uncomfortable then. I knew what I was doing then. You know what you're doing now. You're just not used to people watching." She gave a grand rounds lecture at Northwestern that was standing room only, where she presented a decade of surgical outcomes with her name on every data point. She accepted an invitation to speak at a Women in Medicine symposium and talked, for the first time publicly, about the particular invisibility of high-achieving women in professional partnerships, how the assumption of shared credit calcified over time, how nobody questioned it because everyone found it more comfortable not to. She never mentioned Owen by name. She didn't have to. The medical community is smaller than it looks. By the second month, people were sharing her interview. Junior residents were posting about the grand rounds talk. A piece in a medical news outlet noted the pattern: every major innovation from Dr. Leonora Voss had come with sole authorship on the original research, sole credit in the procedural documentation. Owen's attorney sent a letter requesting she stop making public statements about contributions to the marriage. Patricia responded with a factual summary of every documented solo accomplishment and an invitation to specify which facts were inaccurate. The letter did not come. It was Janelle who found the thing about Kelsey Drummond that changed the shape of everything. Kelsey had been a pharmaceutical representative for 6 years, which meant she moved in the same professional world. Leonora did hospital corridors, conference centers, department dinners. Before Owen, she had been involved with a married cardiologist at Northwestern. Before him, an orthopedic surgeon at Rush who had also been married. Both men had separated from their wives. Both had experienced professional disruption in the aftermath. Both had ended up in arrangements where Kelsey had access to their professional networks and, in one case, a formal consulting role. "She's strategic," Janelle said, laying out the documentation with the calm of a person presenting surgery photographs. "Not malicious, necessarily, but strategic. She targets men with status and access. Owen doesn't have status and access independent of Leonora." Stopped. "Independent of you," Janelle finished. "Correct. Which means when she eventually understands what she's actually acquired here, there are going to be complications." "That's not my problem." "No? But it tells you who he's chosen to rebuild with, and it might be useful at the Hartwell Gala." The Hartwell Foundation Gala was the biggest event on Chicago's medical philanthropy calendar. It was held every year at the Lyric Opera House. Leonora had attended for the past 8 years, always with Owen, always slightly behind him while he worked the room. The foundation had sent her an invitation addressed only to her. She'd been planning to decline. "You're going," Janelle said. "Owen will be there. Kelsey's family is on the foundation board." "Exactly." Janelle looked at her without blinking. "The medical community has spent the last 4 months watching you speak, publish, and lead. They need to see you in the same room as the story they've been told and understand that you're not diminished by it. I'm not interested in performing recovery for an audience. You're not performing recovery. You're showing up to an event you've attended for 8 years because you have every right to be there. That's different." Janelle paused. "The Hartwell Foundation is funding the new cardiac care wing at County. You consulted on the layout. Your name is in their planning documents." Leonora looked out the window at the November gray of Chicago. A city she knew the way she knew her patients, charts by detail, by structure, by what was underneath the visible surface. "I'll go," she said. She went alone. No date, no colleague at her elbow, no professional armor arranged around her. Just herself, in a dress the color of midnight that required no ornamentation because the cut itself was statement enough. The photographers outside the Lyric caught her alone and seemed surprised by it. Surprised that she wasn't hiding, she supposed. Surprised that she was walking up those steps like she'd done it 8 times before, because she had. Inside, the room was everything Chicago philanthropy aimed to be: generous and self-congratulatory in equal measure. The kind of event where real money changed hands for real causes, wrapped in a layer of performance that everyone present understood and accepted as the price of the ticket. She took a glass of champagne. She stood still for a moment and let herself feel where she was. Dr. Reginald Hartwell found her within the first 15 minutes. He was 81, the foundation's patriarch, a cardiac surgeon from an era when there were very few of them. And he looked at Leonora with the particular attention of someone who had watched her career from the beginning. "Didn't think you'd come," he said. "Why wouldn't I? You seemed like the type to hide." "I've seemed incorrectly then." He smiled. It transformed his face from stern to something almost warm. "I want to correct something in tonight's program if you're willing. The cardiac wing planning our executive director credited the architectural firm, but it was your spatial analysis that identified the flow problem in the ICU corridor. Without your consultation, we'd be building something that didn't work. The firm did excellent work. You solved the problem. I'd like to say so." He met her eyes. "If that's all right?" She thought of Janelle. She thought of 14 months of watching her work attributed to a partnership that had never been equal. She thought of Owen's attorney arguing in formal documents that the social events she'd enabled were a professional contribution worth compensating. "Say whatever's accurate," she said. It happened during the remarks, while the room was still settling and glasses were being refilled. Dr. Hartwell, departing from his prepared notes, mentioned the cardiac wing planning process and named Leonora directly her consultation, her identification of a critical design flaw, the particular expertise that had saved the foundation from constructing a ward that wouldn't function. The applause was real, not the polite murmur of an audience that didn't know what they were clapping for, but the kind that came from people who actually understood what had been said. Leonora was aware, at the edge of her vision, of Owen standing near the bar. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. The rest of the evening moved differently than any gala she could remember. People approached her, not with the careful sympathy she'd been receiving for months, but with genuine professional interest. A hospital administrator asking about the wing consultation, a young cardiologist wanting to discuss her valve research, a foundation board member interested in her thoughts on cardiac care equity in underserved communities. She talked for 3 hours and didn't think about Owen once, until he appeared beside her near the end of the night in the space between conversations. "Leonora." "Owen." He looked well, which shouldn't have meant anything but did, briefly, before it stopped. People you spent 11 years with look well for a moment before you remember that their wellness has nothing to do with you anymore. "I didn't think you'd be here." "You've said that twice tonight through different people." "What did you expect, that I'd disappear?" He shifted. Behind him, across the room, Kelsey Drummond was talking to someone from the foundation board with the professional ease of a person who had spent years cultivating exactly this kind of access. Leonora watched her for a moment with something that was not quite pity and not quite recognition. "I never wanted it to go this way," Owen said. "You wanted to leave and take 30% of everything I'd built with you." She kept her voice even. "That's not the same as wanting it to go well. Curtis believes I'm entitled. Curtis Webb believes what you're paying him to believe. She looked at her husband, who would soon be her former husband, and felt the particular clarity that comes from having had time to sit with a hard truth. You contributed to our life, Owen. You were a real partner in real ways. But you didn't build my career. I did that before you, and I did it alongside you, and I'll do it after you. The work I do, the patients who are alive because of what I figured out, that doesn't divide. I never claimed, your attorney claimed it in a formal legal filing. You reviewed and signed it. He was quiet for a moment. Reginald Hartwell isn't going to be your primary reference anymore, she said, not unkindly. The next time you're up for credentialing or department review, the people in this room are going to remember tonight. They're going to remember that I was here and what Reginald said and what the applause sounded like. She paused. That's not a threat, it's just accurate. She excused herself and moved back into the room. She stayed until the very end. She'd never done that before, always left early, the next morning's surgery already assembling in her mind. Tonight she had a 7 a.m. consult and she stayed anyway, talking and laughing and taking business cards from 3 people she genuinely wanted to follow up with. When the last guests were gathering coats and the catering staff were clearing the first tables, she walked out of the Lyric Opera House and down the steps into the cold Chicago night. Her phone showed a message from Patricia. Owen's team called. They want to discuss revised terms. He's proposing 25% of joint liquid assets and no ongoing support. Call me in the morning. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked up at the lit facade of the Lyric, at the architecture of one of Chicago's landmark buildings standing solid against a November sky. She'd attended a lecture here once about the acoustical engineering of the house, how the sound was designed to travel, how the space itself was built to carry things. Everything she was, everything she'd built, lived in her hands and her mind, and the surgical instincts that 15 years of impossible cases had sharpened beyond what she'd imagined possible when she was a resident eating pad thai in a small apartment. Believing that love and work could coexist without one consuming the other. Maybe they could. She hadn't figured that part out yet. But she'd figured out something more foundational. She was, as Amara Singh had pointed out with characteristic bluntness last week over coffee, the only person capable of doing what she did. Owen had known that. Kelsey Drummond would eventually know it too. The Hartwell Foundation board knew it now in a room full of 400 people who would carry it forward into every professional conversation about her name. She typed back, call it 8. I want this done. 6 months later, Leonora stood in the new cardiac care wing at Cook County Hospital, which had opened 3 weeks ahead of schedule, which almost never happened in large-scale medical construction. The ICU corridor flowed exactly the way she'd told them it would. The nursing station sightlines were clear. The equipment staging reduced transport time by 4 minutes per procedure, which in cardiac emergency care was not an abstraction. It was the difference between the outcome you wanted and the one you didn't. On the wall near the entrance, a small plaque listed the planning consultants. Her name was first. She'd heard through the efficient gossip channels of hospital medicine that Owen and Kelsey were having difficulties. Nothing dramatic, just the gradual discovery that the life Owen had imagined required a foundation it turned out he didn't have on his own. He was a good hospitalist, a genuinely capable clinician, but the rooms he'd spent 11 years walking into had been rooms built by someone else's work. And it turned out the rooms you built yourself were a different size entirely. She didn't feel victorious about this. She'd have been lying if she said she felt nothing at all. But mostly what she felt, standing in the corridor that had been designed to work because she'd understood how the work actually worked, was a quiet completeness. The settlement had given Owen 22% of their joint liquid assets, less than his original demand and more than he deserved, which Patricia had explained was the nature of settlements, not justice. Leonora had kept the house, her research accounts, and the professional reputation that no settlement document could have divided anyway. Her phone buzzed. A message from Amara. First solo procedure in the new wing goes beautifully. Patient in recovery. Thought you should know. She typed back, of course it did. I designed the space. She was 41 years old, and she had finally stopped measuring her life against what she'd shared with someone who had been measuring her all along. She walked out of the cardiac wing, through the main corridor, and into the February cold, where the city was doing what Chicago always did in winter, enduring, unapologetically without ornament. She had a 9 a.m. surgery and a 2 p.m. consult and a dinner with Amara and 2 other colleagues who had recently become something closer to friends than she'd allowed anyone to be in years. She had a full life. She'd built it the only way she knew how, the same way she'd built everything piece by piece with precision, starting from what she understood and working outward toward what she didn't yet, trusting that the structure would hold if the foundation was true. It held.